Episode 6 The Eye was the rebel insurgent heist of the Aldhani garrison. However, from an Imperial perspective, this would be a significant rebel attack on an Imperial base, and one in which would ultimately attract the attention of the entire Imperial holonet network, as far as Coruscant itself, due to its payroll sector importance. The opening morning scene to this episode showed Andor and an unsettled Nemik have a discussion about the role of mercenaries and the galactic struggle for freedom. Andor mentions the Empire does not play by the rules, and they don't have to care enough about learning about adapting to an insurgency. However, from an Imperial perspective, Andor is wrong, as this is exactly what the Imperial Security Bureau are focused on, as Major Partagas talks about in terms of identifying sickness. Also, Dedra Meero's identified pattern of stolen Imperial equipment has firmly led to her belief that there is a presence of rebel insurgents at work. Moving on, Commandant Jayhold Beehaz discusses with Colonel Pettigar about the simple nature of the Aldhani people in his attempts to sway the Colonel into thinking the Aldanis are easily manipulated by Imperial-controlled area. The Colonel is an engineering officer sent from Coruscant to inspect the site as a construction project, and makes decisions on the relocation of the Alkenzi airbase closer to the dam. Beehaz has served for several years as the commanding Imperial military officer at the dam, along with his family within the garrison base. As an ageing and pompous Imperial, he appears to be a veteran who has grown complacent by the lack of real military action due to his uneventful posting at the garrison, although he seems to respect the routine of the Empire's formalities. Exiting the front entrance, Beehaz asks Lieutenant Gorn what he makes of Colonel Pettigar, seemingly hoping his charm may be enough to influence his engineering decisions. While the rebels begin moving into their positions to carry out their heist, Colonel Pettigar appears to be surveying the site, and as the first meteor flies overhead, he asks Lieutenant Gorn if the Eye has started. At that moment, Gorn receives word that the Aldhani guests have arrived to a peaceful welcome from Imperial troopers. Meanwhile, as the Aldhani group approaches them, Andor and the rest of the disguised trooper insurgents begin to escort them towards the garrison as part of their plan. The extra troopers Gorn supposedly brought in from the Alkenzi airbase to reinforce the garrison worked well to mask the insurgents as just troopers from another base. I could feel the tension ramping up during these scenes, as the plan could go wrong by a simple slip-up before entering the Imperial base. However, from the Imperials' perspective, they were being set up by one of their own, and that bothered me during this entire episode. Inside his garrison quarters, an anxious Commandant Beehaz, his wife Reboda and his reluctant son prepare to meet with the Aldhani. The conversation between them paints a scene of tension that they all wish to be reassigned off-world, and the Colonel's decision will play a decisive role in their immediate future. I like this scene because it shows the Imperials' identified domestic situation, provide a view that also, like Andor, they were just pawns in the larger galactic stakes. Escorted by Imperial troopers, including the disguised insurgents from the rear, the group of Aldhani reach the garrison's perimeter entrance to meet Lieutenant Gorn. Although Gorn attempts to welcome them, the Aldhani leader simply hopes the Eye finds some good in the Imperials. Seen as the Empire dispersed his people from the indigenous areas, this doesn't deter him from subtly showing Gorn how much they hated them for it. The Commandant and the garrison see the Aldhani as a hindrance and beneath them, but to keep the peace they allow them to gather for the Eye once every 3 years. As the Aldhani surround the sacred stones, Gorn orders some of the squads to watch over the Aldhani for the night, and orders the insurgent troopers to join the return escort with the Commandant and his family. Shortly afterwards, Gorn arrives to escort the Commandant, his family and the Colonel to meet with the Aldhani. I liked how the pompous Beehaz mocked the goat hide exchange, their smell and the nonsensical ceremony before they could retire to a lavish dinner. The scene showed how conceited he was towards the indigenous inhabitants, despite what the Empire had done to change their lives. Moving on, several troopers run across the dam, and Corporal Kimsey questions why they are late. It becomes apparent this was the real squad required from Alkenzi, which Gorn did not join them to call in time to perform their intended escort duties. Arriving to the meeting with the Aldhani, Beehaz wishes to make quick work of their meeting and exchange their goat hides. After Vel gives the signal to go and the returning escort arrive back to the garrison, this is the point of the episode I was dreading. The Imperials would be taken by surprise, and once inside all hell would break loose. Once an outraged Commandant Beehaz realises what is happening, Colonel Pettigar interestingly attempts to take control of the situation by telling the insurgents to let the Commandant's son go, but totally outnumbered, the Colonel is shot in the back by Andor. Knowing the Commandant's fingerprints are needed to unlock the vault, Vel isn't fooled by Beehaz, telling him it can only be opened by a code from the Alkenzi airbase. This scene was dark for a Star Wars production, with the insurgents holding women and children hostage to accomplish their end goal. Although the rebels were trying to avoid killing anyone in the process, it inevitably had to happen, with the colonel being the first casualty. As the terrorised commandant's wife pleads with Beehaz to cooperate, I felt the rebels' tables had turned to show them as the villains in this scene. Receiving static from the controls inside the comm station, a confused Corporal Kimsey is unaware of the jamming device planted by the rebels. Inside the control tower, more Imperial troopers and technicians are caught by surprise as Beehaz is held hostage, and Vel also arrives with the rest of the rebels and more hostages. Vel threatens the Commandant that failure to cooperate in any way will result in death for his wife, son and Imperial subordinates. This scene I felt portrayed the rebels as bad as the Empire. Reaching the vault, the rebels take more Imperial hostages and use them to begin loading the freighter. Meanwhile, Corporal Kimsey intercepts the comms between the rebels and gathers any available troopers suspecting a breach of the vault. Back in the tower, a message is received from the Alkenzi Wing Command requesting a status rep on the vault breach indicator. The rebel Kaz ignores the message and switches off the main lighting. As Lieutenant Gorn arrives at the vault to alert the rebels they must hurry loading the payroll, the Commandant is shocked to see Gorn is involved. I like how he tells the Lieutenant he will hang for his involvement, but Gorn says 7 years serving him was worse. I love the scene with the Alkenzi Air Command responding to the vault breach as Imperial TIE fighter pilots climbed into their cockpits and initiated their controls. Arriving at the vault area, Corporal Kimsey attempts to understand the situation, and Gorn tries to pull rank by instructing him to leave. Unconvinced, Kimsey asks the struggling Commandant for clarification before he collapses, forcing the rebels to start a shootout, resulting in the deaths of Gorn, Kimsey, several troopers and the rebel Taramine. As Andor launches the freighter from the vault, TIE fighters are already in the air and closing on their position. An injured Nemik manages to provide Andor with the flight plan to avoid the chasing TIE fighters and escape off-world. However, we are left wondering if Kaz, seen leaving the garrison in an Imperial officer uniform, has killed the hostages inside the tower. It would seem she would have to prevent them from informing Imperial authorities of any important information. Back on Coruscant, news of the rebel attack has reached the ISB headquarters. Major Partagaz is seen again calling all officers from investigations and the Commission of Operations. Now on full alert to retaliate, the ISB will launch into action in the next episode. For more Imperial Perspective videos, please give a like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and long live the Empire.